Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. Tonight's case begins at a carousel of merriment, where music and laughter veil a darker turn. A rider reaches for the gleaming brass ring, only to find death waiting in its place. What hand set such a trap, and what hidden motives turn a symbol of luck into a token of murder? Take a moment before we begin. Mysteries reward those who notice what others overlook. Have you ever solved a story before the end? Enjoy stories wrapped in riddles and secrets? You're in the right place. Subscribe to join the circle of seekers. Pour yourself something warm, draw the curtains close, and let's uncover the truth. It was 10:56 on a Thursday morning, and I was halfway through toasting a poppy seed bagel in Fritz's prized chrome toaster when the front doorbell rang. 2 short bursts, polite but definite. Not Saul, not the delivery kid from Gramercy Cheese who leans on the buzzer like he's paid by the second. This one had precision. I glanced at the kitchen clock, then at Fritz. He raised an eyebrow and gave the tiniest shrug, which in Fritz speak meant he didn't know who it was either. Wolfe was still upstairs with his orchids, which meant I had exactly 4 minutes before he descended in a foul mood if the interruption was unwarranted. I opened the door to find a woman in her early 30s. Dark hair pinned, eyes sharp but carrying something heavy behind them, like she'd been rehearsing her story on the cab ride over. She wore a sand-colored trench coat, crisp at the collar but wrinkled at the sleeves. In her right hand was a slim leather case, too expensive to match the tension in her jaw. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. "That's me," I said. "And you are either here to sell me something or deliver news my employer will not like." "My name is Althea Vance," she said, "and I was told to come here by someone who's gone missing." That did it. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I assume you know what you're stepping into." "I've been told Mr. Wolfe is difficult." "That's not inaccurate," I said, leading her through the front room and into the office. "But if what you're about to say involves blackmail, antique documents, or anything once buried and recently rediscovered, he'll be interested, after complaining." She sat in the red chair, folded her coat back, and rested the leather case on her lap without opening it. I buzzed the call button. Wolfe answered with a grunt. "We have a guest," I said. "She's got a missing person, possibly a crime, definitely a strange object, and a tone that suggests she's been sleeping with one eye open." Another grunt. 1 minute later, Wolfe entered, heavy-footed as always, wearing his yellow vest with the brown buttons, the one that signals he's in a moderately tolerable mood. He eyed her once and sat. "Speak," he said. "If you have the courage to interrupt my routine, I expect substance." Althea Vance didn't flinch. "My brother Julian has disappeared. But that's not the beginning. The beginning is a brass ring." "A what?" I asked. She turned to me. "A tarnished brass ring about the size of a $50. Julian found it in a box of junk his college roommate left behind after dying in a motorcycle accident 10 years ago. It sat in a drawer for a decade until someone came looking for it last week." Wolfe blinked once. "Looking? How?" "First, a woman with red lipstick and a matching scarf knocked on his door and offered him $500 for it. She claimed it was sentimental." "That's plausible," I said. "She didn't know his roommate's name," she replied. Wolfe grunted. "Then," she continued, 3 days later, someone broke into his apartment. They didn't take money, jewelry, or electronics, just a small photo of the ring, the one he'd posted on a local antiques forum asking about its markings." "What sort of markings?" Wolfe asked. She opened the leather case, produced a single 4x6 photo, and slid it across the desk. I took it and studied the image. It was an old plain ring, but the surface had an engraving, something rough, faint, curling around the edge. Could have been Latin, could have been gibberish. Julian said the letters were faded but looked ancient. He figured it was a trinket, maybe something from a fairground carousel. He laughed about it. Until someone left a warning note under his door. "What did it say?" I asked. "Just this. The ring doesn't belong to you." Nothing else. No signature. And now he's missing, Wolfe said. She nodded. Yesterday morning I called him. No answer. I went to his apartment in Morningside Heights. Door unlocked. Place tossed again. The ring gone. But on his desk was a note in his handwriting. She pulled a folded slip of paper from her coat pocket and handed it to Wolfe. Greater than asterisk. If anything happens to me, asterisk, go to Nero. Wolfe asterisk. Tell him it's about the ring. Wolfe read it once, his lips tight. I didn't know your brother, he said. No, but apparently he knew of you. Flattering, Wolfe murmured, then closed his eyes. Archie. On it, I said. Julian's address. She gave it to me. Wolfe turned back to her. I don't like missing persons cases, he said. They are often self-inflicted and rarely intellectually rewarding. But this isn't about a person, she said, voice level. It's about something people want enough to break in, threaten, and possibly abduct for. That got him. Wolfe's eyes opened. Did your brother have enemies? Not that I know of. He's a web designer, works remotely, quiet, cynical, reads poetry. Does he carry a weapon? No. Is he inclined to paranoia? Only about taxes. Wolfe nodded. Archie will visit the apartment, then I will decide whether to accept the case. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Wolfe had already risen. I walked her out, and just before she reached the door, she turned. He said to come to you. That you were the only one who'd see it clearly. Let's hope he's right, I said. She left, and I grabbed my coat. The morning had gone from quiet bagels to missing brass rings and veiled threats. That's how it always begins, with something too small to matter and too strange to ignore. And if Nero Wolfe was willing to postpone his midday beer, it meant we were already neck-deep in whatever the brass ring had started. Julian Vance's apartment was on the third floor of a pre-war building in Morningside Heights. One of those places with a cracked marble lobby and a doorman who looked like he'd been hired solely to ignore people. I gave him the smile I reserve for reluctant gatekeepers and told him I was there to check in on Mr. Vance. He shrugged and buzzed me through like it was above his pay grade to care whether I was a friend or a creditor. The hallway smelled like a polite blend of floor polish and boiled cabbage. Number 3, B was halfway down, with a brass number plate that had gone green around the edges. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I slid a pick into the lock. Not standard procedure for me, but Wolfe would want to know what was behind the door, not what excuse I used to get through it. The lock gave with an offended click. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. It was a one-bedroom flat, not messy but not manicured. The kind of place someone lived in was out of habit more than joy. The curtains were drawn, but light filtered in through slats like secrets trying to escape. The living room had 2 bookshelves, both stacked unevenly with paperbacks, mostly science fiction and poetry. A laptop sat on a desk in the corner, its lid closed. A mug of cold coffee stood nearby, half full. The kind of setup that says someone got interrupted mid-thought. I started with the obvious. The ring was gone, sure, but the box it came from, the one Althea mentioned, was still there. A cracked shoebox labeled Phil's Stuff in faded Sharpie sat on the second shelf. Inside were postcards, ticket stubs, a few black and white photos of 2 guys in their 20s standing next to a motorcycle, and a watch with a busted band. Nothing that screamed national treasure. Except maybe the ring had been the one thing worth screaming about. I took photos of the room from every angle, careful not to touch anything that didn't beg for it. Wolfe has a thing about preserving scenes, even when the police aren't involved. Especially when they aren't. What caught my eye wasn't the ring's absence. It was the desk drawer. The handle had been broken, splintered slightly at the edges. Not recently, but not long ago either. I slid it open with care. Inside were more papers, bills, receipts, and a torn envelope with a typewritten return address. Gideon's Rest Storage, Queens. I pocketed that. In the bedroom, the bed was made, Neatly. Too neatly. Either Julian was military precise or he hadn't slept here last night. There was no luggage missing, no clothes out, no sign that someone had packed in a hurry. But on the nightstand sat a legal pad with 3 lines scribbled across the top sheet. Don't trust her. Don't trust him either. Ring matters more than I thought. That was it. No names. No initials. Just ambiguity. The kind Wolfe hates most. I flipped the page. Blank. The rest of the pad was untouched. If he'd planned to write more, he'd been interrupted. Or silenced. I returned to the main room and checked the laptop. Password locked. Standard. I left it. Wolfe had someone for that, and it wasn't me. Before leaving, I took one last look at the photo frames on the windowsill. One held a shot of Julian with a woman I didn't recognize. Short blonde hair, dimples, and eyes that looked amused by everything and nothing. The other frame was empty. Not broken. Not turned down. Just empty. Back outside, I tracked down the super, who confirmed Julian hadn't been seen since the morning prior. No visitors noted. No complaints filed. No reason to raise a flag. Until now. I stopped at a cafe across the street, dialed Wolfe, and gave him the rundown. He listened without interruption, which told me 2 things. He was fully engaged, and he hadn't eaten lunch yet. You found the note? He asked. Yes, 2 of them, if we count the one on the legal pad, and the storage facility. Queens, Gideon's Rest. I can head there after. No, Wolfe said. Return here. I want to see the envelope. You planning to visit the burrows? Pui. I merely wish to see whether it matches a typeface used in other materials. Do return. By the time I got back, Wolfe was behind his desk with a dictionary open and a glass of beer untouched. He took the envelope from me with the delicacy of someone handling a court summons. Smell it, he said. I leaned in. Paper. Faint hint of tobacco. Someone smoked while sealing it, he said. But not a cigar. A cigarette. Filtered. Cheaps. That's your version of forensics now. No, Wolfe said. That's Saul's. I spoke with him while you were out. He'll be visiting the storage facility tonight. Discreetly, that explained the untouched beer. Wolfe rarely eats when Saul is working. Something about respect. What's your take so far? I asked. He closed the dictionary and folded his hands. The ring is valuable. Not in gold, but in meaning. Likely symbolic. Perhaps cultural. Religious. Certainly historical. It matters enough to make people lie and disappear. Yes, but the more telling detail is that your search of Mr. Vance's flat yielded both too much and too little. How do you mean? There was no forced entry this time, correct? Correct. And yet it was tossed. Deliberately, but with restraint. Yeah, no broken glass. No ransacked closets. Which means, Wolfe said, either Julian staged it himself, or someone wanted it to look like a burglary without the chaos. To make it appear random. Precisely. But it wasn't. They knew what they wanted. The ring, the photo, and possibly whatever names he didn't write down yet. I leaned back. So where does that leave us? It leaves us, Wolfe said, with a vanished man, a sister full of questions and a brass ring that may be the fulcrum to something much heavier than sentiment. He reached for his beer at last and took a measured sip. Archie. Yes, sir? Find out who his roommate was. The one who left the box behind. Dead men rarely haunt the living without help. The next morning started with eggs, toast, and one of Fritz's blueberry preserves so potent I briefly considered abandoning the detective business and pursuing a future in jam. Wolfe, however, was not in a reflective mood. He was in a rare state of kinetic focus, which, for him, meant 1 foot tapping and a second beer ordered before noon. Archie, he said between bites of Gruyere omelette, find out who Philip Calvert really was. Julian Vance's old roommate. Yes. According to the sister's testimony, the ring came from a box of Calvert's belongings. Calvert died in a motorcycle crash 10 years ago. That's the story. I want to confirm whether it's fiction. I can call Columbia and check alumni records, student death notices. If that doesn't work, I can work Saul's angle. Do both, Wolfe said. Begin with Columbia. A man who leaves behind a brass ring that incites theft and vanishing acts likely left behind more than a diploma. So I did. 2 phone calls and 1 cleverly disguised name drop later, I had a chatty registrar on the line and an old transcript in my inbox. Philip D. Calvert, class of 08, double major in classics and Near Eastern studies. Big fan of archaeological expeditions. Graduated with distinction. The transcript ended there. No records of death, no student memorial, nothing formal. I called the university's alumni office next. Do you have a record of a Philip Calvert dying in an accident in 2013? I asked. The woman on the other end paused. No, but I do have something strange. Strange? There's a notation from 2015 indicating that mail sent to Mr. Calvert's listed address was returned as undeliverable. Marked no such resident. Do you know where the address was? Stamford, Connecticut. I thanked her, hung up, and relayed all of it to Wolfe, who had by then migrated back to the office and was glaring at a map of Manhattan like it had lied to him personally. He's not dead, I said. No, Wolfe murmured. He disappeared, and Julian kept the box of his belongings. Possibly because it was left intentionally. You think Calvert planted it? I think, Wolfe said, that Julian inherited more than junk. He inherited a key. To what? That is what we will find out. Call Saul. I want him to locate Calvert, or whatever name he's using now. Wolfe's tone had that gravity it gets when he's close to the pivot point, the moment a mystery stops being random and starts revealing structure. I called Saul. 10 minutes later, he was on it. Meanwhile, I headed back to Morningside Heights to talk to Julian's neighbor. The one lead I hadn't poked yet. Apartment 3C belonged to a retired librarian named Mrs. Langdon, who answered the door in a blue housecoat and a scowl that melted the moment I mentioned I was trying to help Julian. He's a nice boy, she said. Always carried my groceries. Always smiled. Bit distracted but polite. Have you seen him recently? 3 days ago, she said. He was pacing the hallway on his cell phone. Said something like, I didn't know what it was when I posted it, okay? Then he saw me and hung up. Did you recognize the voice? Didn't hear the other end. Did he mention where he was going? No, but he looked worried. What about visitors? She nodded. A blonde woman came by 3 times that week. Once with a clipboard, once with nothing. Last time she left with a box under her arm. Could you describe her? Hair like wheat, tall, moved like a dancer, but looked like she didn't smile much. That matched the photo from Julian's apartment. I showed it to her. Yes, she said, pointing. That's her. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with news of his own. Saul has traced a man matching Calvert's description to a hardware store in Danbury, Connecticut, working under the name Philip Kane. He went from archaeology to Allen Wrench's. It's a good place to vanish, Wolfe said. He leases a 1-bedroom apartment above the store. Saul will approach tonight. Gently, and the woman... Wolfe closed his eyes. She has yet to surface, but she will. She is the next axis. The ring was bait. The box was delivered. She is a collection. I don't pretend to follow Wolfe's metaphors without squinting, but that one made sense. That night, Saul called from Danbury. Got him, he said. Looks like Calvert. Same face, aged a decade. Kane's a fake identity, paperwork sloppy. He's got a drawer full of Latin translations, ancient coin catalogues, and one very empty jewelry pouch. He's the real source? I think so. And he knows it. When I mentioned Julian, he didn't flinch. But when I said Wolfe's name, he asked if we could talk in private. You're meeting him? In the morning. Quiet diner on Main Street. Wolfe listened to all of this without comment. Then, at precisely 9:47 p.m., the brownstone's phone rang again. This time, Wolfe answered. "Nero Wolfe," he said. I watched him stiffen, not in surprise, but in calculation. He didn't say a word for nearly a full minute. Then, finally, "Very well, if you insist. 10 o'clock tomorrow." He hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. Wolfe leaned back. "The blonde woman." "No name?" "She offered one. Dana Blix. She would like to visit. In person. She says she wants to clarify things before mistakes multiply." "And you believed her?" "Of course not," he said. "But I believe she believes she's running out of time." He closed his eyes, then opened them again. "Archie." "Yes?" "Tomorrow you will meet Mr. Calvert with Saul. Ask him what the ring really was, and who was meant to receive it." "You think it wasn't Julian?" "I think," Wolfe said, "Julian Vance was the unintended guardian of something that was never meant to be found. And now that it's missing, the people who want it are starting to appear. Philip Calvert, alias Kane, had the kind of voice that crawled under your collar and itched there, raspy and flat, like a man who's been rehearsing his fears for a decade and still isn't sure if he's telling the truth or just the best version of it. He leaned forward in the booth, eyes flicking between me and Saul, like he was waiting for someone to pull a knife or worse. A subpoena. "You're telling me," I said, slow and skeptical, "you bailed on an archaeological dig with a ring in your pocket, changed your name, and spent 10 years pretending to be a librarian with bad posture, all because one of your colleagues died and the ring might have been cursed?" He didn't blink. "No. I spent 10 years pretending because a week after I left Syria, the man funding our expedition, the one who insisted we didn't catalogue anything, was found floating in the Bosphorus with a cigarette lighter in his mouth and a thumb missing. That's not a curse. That's a message." "Well," I said, leaning back, "I'd say your definition of a vacation is a little more paranoid than mine." Saul, who'd been silent until now, tapped a finger on the table. "Tell him about the woman." Calvert's mouth tightened. Julian Vance wasn't the only one who got something in the mail. 2 days before I saw his story on the news, I got an envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo. He pulled a battered envelope from the inside of his coat and slid it across the table to me. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance. A woman in a blue coat, red scarf, walking up the steps of what looked like a courthouse. A white ring was drawn in ink around her left hand. "Name?" I asked. "Dr. Evelyn Miraz." She was our linguist. She disappeared in 15. No one heard from her after she went back to Beirut. We all assumed she'd gone native, married a prince, or something equally dramatic. "And now someone wants you to know she's alive, or to think she is," Saul muttered. Calvert nodded. "Exactly." Either way, I took the hint. I retrieved the ring from where I'd hidden it, wrapped in a film canister, stored in a wall behind my old apartment's breaker box, and mailed it to Julian Vance. No return, just the ring. Figured if they wanted it, better he be the one holding the hot potato when they came looking. I stared at him. "You're saying you used a national columnist as a human shield?" Calvert didn't deny it. "He wrote the piece." He stirred the ashes. I just passed him the match. I handed the photo back and signaled for the check. This wasn't the kind of story I could verify in a day, but something in his eyes, part desperation, part guilt, was a brand I'd seen before. A man whose past was folding back over him like a snapped bedsheet in a windstorm. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, lips pressed in a pale, grim line that meant either Fritz had oversalted the pheasant or Wolfe was considering an actual emotion. I gave him the rundown. Calvert, the dig, the death. The ring is a coded artifact, the photo of the woman who may or may not still be alive, and the subtle implication that whoever had sent the photo was orchestrating a grander scheme. Bah, Wolfe said when I finished. Idiocy layered on idiocy, an amateur's fantasy of conspiracy. Possibly, I said, but someone knew to mail a very specific ring to Julian Vance and knew it would trigger public interest, and someone mailed Calvert that photo. The timing is suspect. Coincidence or orchestration? Or both, I added. But Calvert was spooked enough to hand off the ring. He could have dumped it in the Hudson and walked away. Wolfe frowned. People don't walk away from guilt. They bury it in rituals. Calvert mailed the ring to Vance not to protect himself, but to feel righteous. You think he wanted to be seen as noble? I think he's been waiting 10 years for someone to acknowledge he was part of something larger than himself. That kind of man is fragile, Mr. Goodwin, and easily manipulated, which was Wolfe's polite way of saying, keep watching him. We had just enough daylight left to follow a trail of archaeological breadcrumbs, so I rang Lon Cohen to pull what he could on the 2013 dig in Syria, any mention of Julian Vance's original piece on ancient thefts, and a list of the expedition's members. Meanwhile, I headed back downtown to try something radical, actual journalism. I started with the Herald's archives. Julian Vance's original story on plundered relics from the cradle of civilization had run in a Sunday insert 5 years ago. A 2-page spread with grainy images of coins, knives, rings, and sand-dusted excavation sites that looked more like promotional stills from a desert soap opera than evidence of wrongdoing. The ring was pictured, zoomed in, slightly rotated, with a caption that read, "A Roman brass ring, possibly ceremonial." I copied it and brought it back to the brownstone. Wolfe studied it with the mild disgust of a man being asked to examine a fast food wrapper. Crude. Overly polished. That's what caught my eye. The photo was reprinted in 300 dpi. Someone wanted this ring seen in detail. Wolfe's eyelids dropped. Mr. Vance did not include it on a whim. It was chosen, which implies that someone fed it to him, I said. The question is who and why now? Wolfe closed his eyes entirely, his fingers steepled. The ring was bait. Mr. Vance was the platform. The recipient was not the public, but the participants. Our engineer of drama has cast a wide net, and we are inside it. Fritz called from the kitchen that the consommé was ready. Wolfe rose. Where are you going? I asked. To dine. Thinking is an exertion and requires nourishment. I watched him waddle off and turn to the window, the lights of Manhattan blinking like a nervous Morse code. Somewhere, someone was watching the story unfold exactly as they'd planned, and we were only just flipping to Act 2. If Wolfe had decided the ring was bait and Vance was the hook, that made the rest of us live fish circling the line, waiting to find out which one would get reeled in next. Wolfe, being Wolfe, didn't plan to do any splashing. That was up to me, Saul, and whatever patience we had left between us. The next morning, I was halfway through a bowl of Fritz's cinnamon oatmeal. Don't knock it. He could make prison gruel taste like a Viennese soufflé when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting Lon Cohen with another round of dig gossip. Instead, I got a voice that sounded like dry velvet and nervous cash. "This is Jasper Grunewald," the caller said. "You don't know me, but I was a patron of Julian Vance's column. I believe he may have mentioned me in passing. He hadn't, which meant either Vance hadn't trusted him or had considered him too dull to matter. Either way, the man sounded urgent, the kind of polished worry you only hear from someone who's either genuinely rattled or auditioning for a breakdown. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe," he said. "Privately. I'm prepared to pay a retainer. This is not about Julian's death, at least not directly. But I believe something I did, or failed to do, may have placed others in danger." That got Wolfe's attention. 10 minutes later, we had him in the office, looking like a banker in retreat. Crisp cuffs, expensive panic. He was tall, lean, and as starched as a sermon. He sat in the red chair like it might explode beneath him and kept dabbing at his temple with a monogrammed handkerchief. Wolfe didn't offer tea. That's hospitality. We weren't at that stage yet. I financed Julian Vance's trip to Cairo in 2020, Grunewald began, as part of a research fellowship into stolen antiquities. It wasn't public. Julian had fallen out with the university. This was off books. You gave him money to dig around in international smuggling, Wolfe said. Grunewald flinched. No. To document, not to participate. It was meant to expose illicit chains, auctions, back channels, all that. And did it? I asked. I thought so. Julian sent back drafts. But then he stopped. Radio silence for months. When he returned, he was changed, nervous, obsessive. He told me the ring was important, but not why. What did he say? Wolfe asked, without lifting a brow. He said, and I quote, "There's a voice in this ring, Jasper. It doesn't whisper. It indicts." I thought he was being poetic. I assumed drugs, trauma, madness. Who knows? Did he ever show you the ring? I asked. Grunewald nodded. Yes. Once. Briefly. It looked ordinary to me. Brass? Dull. But he kept it in a box lined with cotton like it was radioactive. I asked him once if he thought it was cursed. He said it was worse. It was earned. Wolfe grunted. That was as close to leaning forward as he ever got. I take it, he said slowly. You believe someone was looking for this ring, that Julian's possession of it may have precipitated his death. Grunewald's hands trembled. Yes, and I fear I may be next. Why? Because 3 days ago, someone left a copy of Julian's article on my desk. No note, just the article. Folded to the page with the ring's photograph. Where do you work? I asked. At Grunewald and Perrin, cultural acquisitions. We vet artifacts before museum purchases. My office is secure. Badge access, cameras. No record of who left it. I met Wolfe's eyes. He didn't blink, but I could feel the weight shift. Mr. Grunewald, Wolfe said, you are neither a criminal nor a fool, though your decisions border on the reckless. You may, however, be useful. You will remain available by phone until I say otherwise. Archie, show him out I did. And by the time I returned, Wolfe had already summoned Saul. You'll tail Mr. Grunewald for 48 hours. I want to know who he meets, who follows him, and whether anyone else receives curious clippings. Saul nodded and vanished, as only Saul can do. After lunch, Wolfe sent me back to the Herald, this time not for archives. He wanted me to track down the photo editor who'd selected the ring image for Vance's original article. 5 years back, mind you. It was a long shot, but Wolfe believed that the selection process might have been manipulated. It took 3 elevator rides and a stack of name drops. But eventually I found myself in a cubicle stacked with coffee mugs and framed pictures of cats dressed like senators. The woman behind the desk was named Darla Wixom, and she looked like the kind of person who'd seen too many deadlines and not enough thanks. Yeah, I remember the ring photo, she said after I offered Wolfe's card. Vance was weird about it. He brought it in on a flash drive and said it had to be printed exactly as is. No edits, no touch-ups. I thought it was ego. But now, she trailed off. Now, I prompted. Now I think he was scared. He asked me once, after the piece ran, whether anyone else had requested that image. Like, specifically. I told him no, but I lied. Someone had my pulse ticked. Who? She tapped her keyboard and pulled up a name. Alan J. Moretti. Freelance researcher. Said he was writing a book on ancient forgery. Paid for reprints of just that one photo. 6 times. Never followed up. Wolfe didn't react much when I relayed it. Just tapped a finger on the arm of his chair and closed his eyes. Mr. Moretti, Mr. Goodwin, he said finally, is either a connoisseur of brass or a messenger with gloves. Either way, I want him here. I started digging. Wolfe didn't assign missions like a general. He nudged them into motion like a man coaxing a reluctant souffle, but when he said, I want him here, it wasn't a suggestion. It was the commandment of Mount Wolfe. so I went after Alan J. Moretti like a polite bloodhound with a license to annoy. Finding him wasn't easy. He didn't show up in the standard freelance researcher databases, which, believe it or not, are a thing now. No social media, no website, not even a rusty blog last updated during the Bush administration. I called every publisher, even tangentially related to ancient artifacts or museum theft, and came up empty. Finally, it was a junior fact-checker at the Metropolitan Museum who came through. "Moretti," she said, chewing her pen. "He used to come in twice a year, ask about provenance records, mostly Egyptian and Roman stuff. He hasn't checked in since April. Always wore gloves. Said fingerprints corrupt the past. Sounded like our guy." She had one more crumb. An address he'd used for a book submission that never materialized. An apartment on 71st Street, East Side, 5th floor. No buzzer, but a mail slot with the name still taped to it. I didn't knock. Wolfe hadn't asked for a social call. Instead, I planted myself across the street in a diner with bad coffee and a view of the door. It was 8 hours before anything stirred. At 9:16 p.m., a man in a camel hair coat and wide-brimmed hat exited the building with a cautious gait and the posture of someone who'd never been comfortable in his own skin. I followed. He didn't go far. Just 3 blocks to a newsstand, bought a paper, didn't look at it, then walked another 2 blocks to a private library branch that closed 10 minutes after he entered. I waited. When he came out, he didn't head home. He headed west. By the time he turned toward the park, I figured this wasn't a bedtime stroll. I caught up at the corner. "Evening, Mr. Moretti," I said. "Got a minute?" He froze like I'd handed him a snake. "I don't know you," he said. "You do now?" "Name's Goodwin. Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. You've heard of him." He blinked once. "I know of him." "Good. Then you'll also know it's not wise to make him wait." "I'm not involved," he said, low and fast. "I don't want to be involved." "Too late," I said. "You bought 6 copies of a photograph connected to a dead man's article. That's enough involvement to get you a seat in Wolfe's office. Let's go." He hesitated, then nodded. "I don't want trouble." I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, "You're already knee-deep in it, pal." By the time we got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with a glass of beer and the expression of a man reluctantly tolerating oxygen. He didn't rise, of course. He just rotated his eyes toward the doors we entered. "Mr. Moretti," he said. "Sit." Moretti did, his back rod straight, hat in his lap. Wolfe sipped. "You printed 6 enlargements of a photograph from Julian Vance's article. You told the Herald it was for a book on forgeries. You never wrote that book. Why?" "Because I got scared." "Of what?" "The ring." "Explain." Moretti's throat worked like a bad piston. "I study replicas, fakes made to resemble ancient artifacts. Most are harmless. But the ring, that was different. I knew the design. It's identical to a funerary piece missing from the Amenti excavation in 1928. That artifact was reported stolen, likely during the handover to a private French collector. Never recovered. Vance found it," Wolfe said. Moretti nodded. "Or he found something made from it. And he published it. That photograph wasn't just a ring, it was a flag. A signal to anyone who'd buried that history that it wasn't buried anymore." "And you feared retaliation?" "Yes, for even recognizing it. The Amenti theft was never solved, but rumors said it was covered up by a museum board in Marseille. That board had money, reach. Vance publishing it meant someone would want the chain severed." Permanently, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Why did you take the copies?" "To study it. To confirm my fear. And then I destroyed them. All of them." Wolfe folded his hands. "You did not kill Mr. Vance?" "No, I barely knew him. We only met once at a lecture." Wolfe considered that, then turned to me. "Archie, contact Inspector Kramer. Tell him, Mr. Moretti should be regarded as a witness. Not a suspect. For now, Moretti's shoulders sagged with what I'd call genuine relief. After he left, Wolfe sat silently for a full minute. Then he spoke. The ring is the crux. Not sentimentally, strategically. It was not merely smuggled, it was repurposed, laundered, then revealed. Mr. Vance chose to expose it. Someone else chose to bury it again. That struggle continues, and Grunewald remains a question mark. I want Saul to follow him longer. 3 days, not 2. That was Wolfe's way of admitting the stew still had too many chunks. We weren't done, not close. And something told me the next spoonful would burn. Saul Panzer can make himself invisible when he wants to, which is one of the many reasons Wolfe pays him more than most bankers earn for pushing pens. The morning after Moretti's midnight confession, I passed Saul the new assignment over a quick breakfast at Rustermann's. He accepted it without blinking. 3 days on Grunewald, he said. Anything in particular? Everything in particular, I said, especially if he goes anywhere with marble floors or dead languages on display. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in conference with his orchids and would not be disturbed. I made a few calls, dug through some newspaper clippings, and finally reached someone at the Marseille Museum archives who was either half asleep or under orders not to speak English before lunch. Eventually, I got a brief acknowledgement. Yes, the Amenti ring had once been in their possession. No, it was no longer part of the official catalogue. The transfer documents were, how did he put it? Delicately archived. That meant vanished. At lunch, Wolfe resumed human interaction and consumed braised duck with blackberry glaze like the bird had insulted him personally. Afterward, he pushed the plate away and spoke without preamble. The ring was removed in 1934 from the museum under the pretense of a loan for restoration. It was never returned. A board member named Etienne Duval signed the transfer. He disappeared 2 years later under suspicious circumstances involving a steamer in Trieste. I raised a brow. That sounds dramatic, even for you. He was pushed overboard, Wolfe said, dabbing his lips, but let us not romanticize. This theft, like all such thefts, was pedestrian greed lacquered with scholarly language. The ring resurfaced in Vance's article because he discovered a connection, likely through the Fletcher Foundation. That name again. I sat back, arms crossed. You think the Foundation has the ring? I think they had it, Wolfe said, and I think someone feared Vance would trace it there. The murder was preventive, not punitive. We were interrupted by the phone. Fritz brought it in on a tray as usual, as if it might explode without warning. Archie, I said into the receiver. It was Saul. He met with someone, Saul said, low and fast. Grunewald. At the apartment on 84th in Lexington. 3rd floor. Guy's name is Lambert. Rufus Lambert. Runs something called the North Atlantic Antiquities Fund. Registered non-profit. But the tax records stink. Stink how? No declared acquisitions in 2 years, but 6 trips to Morocco, 5 to Rome, 4 to Cairo. I tailed him afterward. He went straight to the Fletcher Foundation offices. No stops, I thanked him and hung up. Wolfe, I said, turning, we've got smoke. I want fire, he replied. Get me a list of every board member at the Fletcher Foundation. Now, while I did that, Wolfe called Lon Cohen at the Gazette and squeezed out a few favors with the subtlety of a boa constrictor. Cohen confirmed the Foundation had recently acquired several Middle Eastern artifacts under restricted provenance, which is code for don't ask where we got this. I printed the board list and brought it in. Wolfe barely glanced at it before pointing. There. Miles Garrison. He was Duval's junior aide during the museum years. Now he's treasurer of the Foundation. That was a thread, and Wolfe never let a thread dangle. Bring him, he said, with care. No police. Yet that night I paid a visit to Mr. Garrison's brownstone on Riverside. He answered in a house coat and looked like a man who preferred his bourbon more than his books. I don't do interviews, he said. Good, I replied. This isn't one. He tried to shut the door. I stepped inside. Sometimes the Goodwin charm works better when it's got a little shove behind it. You're going to come talk to Wolfe, I said. You know the name? He nodded once. His eyes flicked toward the stairs like he was calculating escape routes. Then he sighed. Let me get my coat. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was seated, of course, but alert. He did not offer Garrison a drink. That's how you know you're not a guest. You're an exhibit. Mr. Garrison, Wolfe said, you once handled the transfer of an Egyptian funerary ring from the Marseille Museum in 1934. I was a junior clerk, Garrison muttered. You witnessed the signature of Duval. And later inherited his portfolio. You now serve on the board of an institution that quietly reacquired that same ring. Garrison went rigid. I won't discuss Foundation business. You will, Wolfe said, or I will summon Inspector Kramer and have your activities dissected with dull instruments. Mr. Goodwin, I showed Garrison a copy of the photograph from Vance's article. He flinched. Julian Vance died with that image beside him, Wolfe said. You must understand, Mr. Garrison, that we will have answers. Either from you, or your lawyer, or your obituary. That got him. It wasn't me, he said quietly. I didn't order Vance killed. I warned them not to publish the piece. I thought if we offered him money. Who is we? Wolfe said. Garrison closed his eyes. The internal circle. Lambert, Harkness, me. We knew the ring's past. We also knew if it was made public, everything we'd built could collapse. Donors want clean hands. And Lambert? He panicked. Vance declined the bribe. Lambert said we needed to control the damage. I didn't ask how. I swear I didn't know he'd go that far. Wolfe leaned back, exhaling slowly. There it is. He murmured. The truth, varnished by cowardice. Garrison sat still as a mausoleum. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said. Notify Inspector Kramer. Tell him, mister. Garrison is ready to talk. I stood, heading to the phone. It wasn't over yet. But the finish line was on the horizon. And this time, Wolfe wasn't just solving a murder. He was unearthing a cover-up buried longer than the tomb it desecrated. Kramer arrived at the brownstone just after 9, his trench coat soaked and his temper pre-soaked in whatever storm had blown in over the East River. He stalked into the office like he'd been summoned to an exorcism and wanted it over before his sandwich got cold. Where is he? He barked. Wolfe, of course, remained seated behind his desk like a Buddha with indigestion. Mr. Garrison is in the front room, under Mr. Goodwin's supervision. He has something of value for you. I'll be the judge of that, Kramer said. He dropped his soaked hat on the windowsill and glared at Wolfe. You damn well better not be wasting my time. Wolfe sniffed. Do sit, Inspector. You'll want to hear this before you pounce. I stepped out and brought Garrison in. The man looked like a church mouse caught in a cathedral fire, ashen, twitchy, and already halfway to repentance. Kramer leaned back in the red chair. Start talking. And Garrison did. He recounted the whole mess, how the Fletcher Foundation had quietly acquired the Amenti ring through a string of laundering fronts, with Lambert orchestrating the key purchases and Grunewald acting as the cleaner. Vance's article, it turned out, had struck closer than they'd expected. His research pointed directly to the Duval disappearance and the restoration loan from Marseille. That had made them sweat. What about the murder? Kramer asked. Who planned it? Garrison hesitated. Wolfe's gaze drilled into him like an auger through pine. Lambert, Garrison said at last. He was the only one willing to go that far. The rest of us wanted to suppress the article, pay Vance off, maybe threaten his career, but Lambert, he said we needed to neutralize the threat. Was Moretti involved? I asked. Yes, he was our fixer. Old contacts from the Milan import years. I didn't know he'd been brought in until after the murder. Lambert must have contacted him directly. Kramer grunted. And Grunewald handled logistics. He booked the hotel and arranged the access. I didn't know until 2 days ago. When I read Vance had been strangled, I knew we were past the point of cleaning it quietly. Wolfe exhaled like he'd finally scratched an itch. Mr. Garrison, your cowardice is exceeded only by your capacity for self-preservation. Yeah, Kramer muttered. We'll see how talkative you are at the precinct. He snapped his fingers at me. Goodwin, bring your notes tomorrow morning. I want statements, timelines, everything. You'll have them, I said. Kramer cuffed Garrison with the ease of a man tying his shoes and herded him out without another word to Wolfe. That silence, I admit, was a treat all its own. When the door closed, Wolfe didn't move. I waited for the usual triumphant declaration. It didn't come. Instead, he spoke low and slow. The ring. You think they still have it? I asked. No, Wolfe said. Grunewald's involvement is too exposed. He would have passed it along the moment Vance died. It is no longer in the city Europe, perhaps, or buried again. Somewhere deeper, I went to the sideboard and poured him a glass of beer. The silence in the room had shifted, from tension to calculation. Wolfe was already 3 steps beyond Kramer's finish line. Saul called while you were with Kramer, I said. Grunewald's vanished. Wolfe raised a brow. Convenient. Lambert, too, I added. Both of them disappeared yesterday evening. Saul checked flight manifests. Nothing but the harbor. Smugglers don't always use customs forms, Wolfe muttered. Mr. Panzer will keep looking. We let the silence settle again. Wolfe sipped. I waited. What about the Foundation? I finally asked. They'll survive this. Survive? Certainly, Wolfe said. They have money. And people with money are rarely dismantled by scandal, merely discolored by it. That's optimistic, I said. No, Wolfe replied. It is cold arithmetic. We have identified the murderers. We have connected the theft, but the artifact is lost again. Without it, the scandal is theory. The headlines will last a week, the shame a season. Then, as ever, the donors will return. I didn't like it, but I didn't argue. Wolfe was right. Justice, in our line, was often partial, uneven, weighted by the scale of public interest, but there was still work to do. Kramer's going to want Moretti, I said. Moretti will not return, Wolfe replied. He will vanish like the ring. He has done this before. He's good at it. Then it's over. No, it concludes when I say so. That was Wolfe. Justice might dodge the courtroom, but it never dodged his chair. The next morning, Saul turned up with a packet of documents smuggled from Grunewald's safe. Lambert's name was all over them. Coded payments, charter routes, shell acquisitions. Enough to make a federal agent sob with gratitude. Wolfe didn't even blink. He read them, sorted them, and sent copies to 3 reporters by name. Not anonymously, with a cover letter. That afternoon, the Gazette ran a front-page story headlined, "The Mummy's Fingerprint, How a Dead Pharaoh Exposed a Living Conspiracy." Wolfe read it over, roast pork with apples. When he was done, he wiped his mouth and said, "Satisfactory." "Kramer's going to throw a fit," I said. "He always does," Wolfe replied. "And when he's finished, he will thank me." He didn't, but he called. And in Kramer's speak, that was practically a bear hug. So, the ring was gone. The killers were on the run. The scandal had bloomed with headlines and photographs and nervous trustees sprinting for legal counsel. Wolfe, as usual, had not left his house. And me? I was just glad to be back in my own bed with my shoes off, a glass of something strong nearby, and the last typed page of notes filed in the red folder marked Amenti, Vance Case. No need for poetry. Wolfe had cracked the case. Vance had gotten his story published, posthumously. And somewhere, in some corner of the world, a funerary ring carved 5,000 years ago had once again vanished into the shadows. Some mysteries don't end. They just go quiet, until someone dares to dig them up again. At precisely 10 minutes past 5, I returned to the brownstone after what Wolfe might have called a mammalian errand. A long trudge through Midtown, chasing down one of our increasingly elusive threads. Fritz opened the door with his usual quiet precision, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of concern. Wolfe noticed it too from behind his desk. "Fritz?" he prompted without looking up from the Times. "I took a call, sir," Fritz said, "from Miss Hilda Branscombe." She sounded distressed. She said she'd found something and would only speak to Mr. Goodwin. I told her he was out, but she hung up before I could say more. I exchanged a look with Wolfe. "Should I head over?" He shut the paper with a crisp snap. "You should." 5 minutes later, I was in the Heron Arms lobby again. Hilda's apartment door opened after 2 knocks. Her face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed. She motioned me in without a word and handed me an envelope. "I found it in Ruth's sewing cabinet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "tucked inside an old pattern book." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 2 items, a note handwritten in blue ink and a photo, blurry but unmistakable. The note was short. "If anything happens to me, look here." He'll try to make it look like an accident. It was signed Ruth Darnell. The photo was grainy but showed a man, mid-40s, square jaw, heavy-set, clutching what looked like a brass ring in one hand, mid-conversation with Ruth. Behind them was the carousel in Bryant Park. I recognized the man. So did Wolfe when I returned and laid everything before him. "Carl Jevons," Wolfe said with narrowed eyes. "Insurance broker. Clean record, no prior connection to Ruth Darnell until the brass ring surfaced. But now this? Looks like Ruth was being blackmailed," I said, "and Jevons had the motive to shut her up." Wolfe let out a sound that was somewhere between a grunt and a hum. "Jevons," he said, "is not unintelligent. This photo proves association, not culpability. Miss Branscombe must be protected, and Mr. Jevons must be prodded. Want me to prod?" "Yes, prod with care. Invite him here for a consultation. Tell him it concerns a recent appraisal of antique jewelry. Mention the brass ring." That evening, Jevons arrived in a charcoal overcoat and a skeptical expression. Wolfe greeted him with a nod, but didn't offer sherry. "We've been asked," Wolfe began, "to appraise the legitimacy of a certain object with ties to your professional circles. A brass ring, quite old. Unusual markings." Jevons stiffened. "What are you implying?" "Nothing. Yet. But it seems the ring passed through Miss Ruth Darnell's hands." Shortly before her death, Jevons rose abruptly. "If this is some kind of trap—" "Sit," Wolfe commanded, his voice sharp. "You are not under arrest, Mr. Jevons. But you are involved. A woman died, and you, photographed with her, rumored to have financed the Midtown Heritage Project, stand to benefit from her silence." His face paled. "You don't know what you're talking about." "No?" Wolfe leaned forward. "Then explain this photograph. And this note." Ruth was afraid. "Of someone. Her words. And you were the last confirmed person to meet her before the accident." Silence. Then Jevons slumped. "She was going to ruin me," he muttered. "Said she had proof I was laundering funds through the Preservation Trust. She found the ring in an old archive box and figured it was worth something. But she wanted a cut. Threatened to go public. You killed her?" I asked bluntly. "No, I swear it. I was scared, yes. But I didn't. I left. She was alive when I walked out." Wolfe folded his hands. "I believe you. For now. But if you are lying, Mr. Jevons, I will see to it that you join Ruth Darnell in the obituaries." "Good evening." Jevons fled. Wolfe turned to me. "Someone else was watching that night," he said. "Someone who knew what Ruth had found and waited for her to threaten the wrong person." "You mean—" "Yes. We're close, Archie. Very close. But we need to re-examine the carousel." "The carousel?" "It's where she met him. and likely where she died. But something's wrong with that timeline. Wolfe closed his eyes. Tomorrow we return. Bring the photo and the brass ring. The answer is there, circling endlessly with the horses. I admit I was halfway convinced that Wolfe was bluffing. After all, the clues were as scattered as crumbs after one of Fritz's coffee cakes. Nothing quite fit. But that morning, when I walked into the office with the Times tucked under my arm, Wolfe was already in his chair, motionless, staring at the Globe like it owed him an apology. "Archie," he said without turning his head, "I presume you were discreet with Mr. Carroway yesterday?" "As a nun in a confessional," I replied, hanging up my coat, though he was nervous enough to sprout feathers. Wolfe grunted. "Good. He will remain so. He is not the murderer." I froze. "Not?" "But he had motive, access, and the nerve to lie to your face." "And yet he lacks the precision," Wolfe replied. "Mr. Carroway is a careless man. The manner in which Miss Lila Vaughan was killed, clean, almost ritualistic, excludes him." I perched on the edge of my desk. "So what now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "we force the real killer to expose himself. Mr. Vincent Dolan will be here at 11, Dolan. You think—" "I think," Wolfe said, finally turning to face me, "that he has wrapped himself too tightly in innocence. When one pretends too thoroughly, it often becomes performance art." By the time 11 struck, Vincent Dolan walked in looking like he was already preparing for a courtroom. Immaculate suit, perfect part in his hair, but his eyes flicked across the room like a man memorizing exits. "You wish to see me, Mr. Wolfe?" he asked, trying to sound bored. "I did," Wolfe said, gesturing to the red chair. "Please." Dolan, Saturday. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You were quite emotional at Miss Vaughan's funeral." Dolan shrugged. "We were close." "And you were close enough to know she was planning to sever her ties with the agency." That caught him. "What?" "Number. That's absurd. She was, in fact, scheduled to meet with her solicitor the following morning. A new will was drafted. You were not included." Dolan sat upright. "That's not possible." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "You see, she confided in a certain Miss Harlan, who, after some encouragement, provided us with her copy of the document." Now Dolan was sweating. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is." "No game," I cut in. "Just facts. Like the fact that your alibi for the night of her death is shaky at best, and someone matching your build was seen entering her apartment complex at 9:15. I was at the office." "No," Wolfe said sharply. "You were at the office until 8:50. A cleaning woman signed the register. After that, your time is unaccounted for." Dolan stood up. "I want a lawyer." "By all means," Wolfe said. "But do know this, Mr. Kramer has been informed. He will want to speak with you soon." Dolan's jaw flexed, but he said nothing more. He stormed out. "Fritz," Wolfe called, "please inform Inspector Kramer that Mr. Dolan is ready to be collected." I turned to Wolfe. "So that's it?" "No," he said. "Not quite. We still lack proof. That is why we need Miss Harlan to play her part. She will attend the gathering tonight and make sure Mr. Dolan believes she still has the original will. That's bait." "Precisely," Wolfe said, "and we shall be the trap." I wasn't thrilled with the plan, but Wolfe's tone didn't allow for argument. That night we arranged the brownstone to receive guests. Miss Harlan arrived first, visibly nervous. I assured her Wolfe would be just a few feet away the entire time. By 8, the rest had arrived. Carroway, Mrs. Keene, and 2 junior associates from the agency who had known Lila. Dolan showed up last, claiming he was just curious to see what all the buzz was about, but the look in his eyes was anything but casual. Drinks were served. Small talk filled the room like smoke. Wolfe didn't move from his chair, and I lingered near the hallway door where I could see everyone. Then it happened. Miss Harlan excused herself to the powder room. Dolan followed 5 minutes later, pretending to refill his drink. Wolfe's eyes met mine. We moved. In the hallway, Dolan had Miss Harlan cornered. His voice was low but urgent. "You still have the will, don't you? Just give it to me. We can talk about what it's worth." She didn't reply. Her hand trembled. I stepped forward. "That's enough, Mr. Dolan." He turned and ran. I tackled him 2 strides later. Wolfe appeared in the hallway as I pinned Dolan to the floor. "Mr. Dolan, your performance is now concluded." "Call Kramer," I said, breathing heavy. "Already done," Wolfe said calmly. I was halfway through refilling my coffee when Wolfe said, "Archie, close the door and sit." That tone meant the bull had found the matador. I shut the door and turned, folding myself into the red armchair like a man settling in for a front-row execution. Wolfe placed the brass ring, our titular talisman, on the desk as if laying a bishop's corpse on a marble slab. "It is a device," he began, "used not merely as a sentimental trinket, but as a message of inclusion and hierarchy. A badge for the unspoken guild within the executive circle of Belmont Aerodyne." "That would be," I said, "our late Henry Cuthbert's secret gentlemen's club?" "Yes. Not quite a club, a compact. The ring was presented to those who had brought into a pact that extended influence and favor. Cuthbert, as head of research, was the gatekeeper, and someone else wanted that gate torn off its hinges, which, I said, brings us to murder." Wolfe's lips formed the smallest flicker of a smile. "Indeed." He reached for the notebook he rarely touched, flipping it open with gravitas. "The motive, of course, was not jealousy over engineering brilliance or ambition alone. It was protection." He ticked off fingers. "Mr. Lionel Gable had a history of grey dealings, contracts routed through shell firms. Miss Asquith provided financial data to support that. But the linchpin was Patricia Belmont, a sat-up. The widow. She was no grieving statue. She knew Cuthbert had been preparing to expose the internal misappropriations. Belmont Aerodyne was not merely leaking funds. It was funding unsanctioned aerospace projects, ventures likely to spark federal scrutiny if brought into daylight. And she panicked? She did worse. She enlisted an old flame, Gable, to make certain Henry Cuthbert never reached the U.S. Attorney's office. They used Edwin Knox, the assistant with gambling debts and a taste for pressure, as their unwitting intermediary. But Knox grew erratic. That's why he ended up floating near the pier. Correct, a silencing, disguised as despair. Wolfe folded his hands. The pattern was too clean. Convenient deaths, ill-timed resignations. Gable eliminated loose ends, but the ring Cuthbert left behind was his final rebellion. He passed it not to Patricia, but to Knox, his conscience's Hail Mary. "And it landed in your office, via me," I said. "Fortunate," Wolfe replied. "Had it not, I suspect your own odds would have lengthened substantially." We sat in silence for a breath. Wolfe reached for the phone and summoned Kramer. When the inspector arrived, huffing and grumbling, Wolfe wasted no time. The names, the deeds, the sequence, all of it unspooled like a string of dark pearls. Kramer grunted when it was done. "You sure, Wolfe?" "As sure as I need be. The evidence has been arranged. You'll find Gable's fingerprints on Knox's apartment door and a wire transfer to a holding account traced to Patricia Belmont 2 days before Cuthbert's death." Kramer's pencil hovered. "And motive?" Wolfe sighed. "They feared scandal, indictment, ruin. In such circles, death is considered less costly than disgrace." Kramer left with a hell of a thing and slammed the door behind him. I leaned back. "So, justice is served. The brass ring doesn't shine so bright after all." Wolfe turned the object once more in his hand, then let it roll into his desk drawer like a coin into a dark slot. "It never did," he said. This case had ended, not with a bang, but with the polished click of truth locking into place. I lit a fresh cigar and let the smoke rise in coils like memory.